The bad news, Alan. So I grew up in New York, and New York at the time was like centered around gangs, and street creds were legitimate. They were a real thing. Some people had them, and some people didn't, but word of mouth was still like a very powerful thing. I had gotten in a couple of fights in school at maybe 10 years old. I don't really remember exactly, 10 or 11 years old. I'd been in a couple of fights, and I was doing some things that I shouldn't have been doing, and my mother enrolled me in the Buddhist Academy, which was a dojo that taught Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, and Taekwondo in the basement of a Buddhist temple. And no advertisements, nothing like that outside. It was a place where you would go and you would just practice martial arts in the basement with some very serious senseis. And I had first tried Taekwondo. It wasn't really my thing. I was very thin for my age. I hadn't really developed and grown out at that point, and I couldn't just give those blows. I didn't have the power to really deliver a strike. So one of the senseis told my mother, said, put him in judo. And I remember what he said to me. He said, judo is the best thing you can learn because all fights end on the ground. This is before the Ultimate Fighting Championship. This is before all of this human cockfighting, as I call it. This is the big thing is boxing at the time. And now you have this sensei who is explaining to me that when you're in a real fight, you got to take your opponent to the ground. You have to incapacitate him, and then you have to escape. And he said, that's what it's about. It's not about hurting people. It's about escape. So I started taking these classes, and they had all these framed pictures throughout the dojo, some in the locker room, some in this little area. Now, this place was a sweat box. Let me tell you, it was a basement of this small building. The entire length of one side of that basement, which sat next to a boiler room, was where they had the mats that we would practice judo and jiu-jitsu. It was about 15 feet wide by, I'd say, 60 feet long, okay? And you could get a real run and do some real throws. I mean, you could do some real rolls and, all that stuff in there. It was a long space that you could really, get some good practice in there. But it was next to a boiler, and you would have to have your gi washed every time you did a practice. And then there was the locker room and this little area for a few chairs and 2 bathrooms toward the back. No office. Sensei had a desk, and he would put the money in a little box underneath this fold-out table. That was his desk, and no one ever touched it. That was it. No one ever took a thing out of there. No one stole anything. So in the dressing room, in the locker room, some of these framed pictures were news articles about Alan Koesch, who became Bad News Brown. And he looked very different in these articles. He had a mustache, he had some hair, and the articles were about how this judoka had won the bronze medal at the Olympics. And all the guys in the dojo used to talk about him. They'd say, Well, that's Alan. Alan is from this dojo. Alan is the best judoka in the entire United States. He is the best, and he really won the gold medal, but they didn't give it to him because he's black. This is what they would say. And this is the first time I ever saw someone do this. My mother did it later on, but this is the first time I saw this. I had asked, if he won the gold medal, why did he only get the bronze medal? And the sensei looked at me and said, "This is why." And I said, "Because he's black?" He said, "Yep, that's what it is." So I would go to Madison Square Garden with my sperm donor dad and watch the wrestling matches religiously. And I remember when Bad News Brown debuted in Madison Square Garden, but I didn't put two and two together that this was Alan Koesch from the dojo. I just knew him as Bad News Brown. Here he is in the ring. He looked a lot different. He was bald, no mustache, and I remember the night that he debuted, he came to the ring and he did the the Black Power gimmick in New York. He got on the microphone, he said, "Okay, all of you beer belly sharecroppers," and he threw up the Black Power fist, and man, the garden loved it. They were cheering him like he was one of the faces, like he was one of the good guys. All the blacks, the Puerto Ricans loved this. And the white guys loved it too. People thought it was great. And that's New York. That's the way it is in New York. And people really liked that. And I'm watching him wrestle and I'm saying to myself, you know, he's falling like a judoka. He's falling, he's taking the judo falls. You know, he's rolling into his falls. And it was different from what all the other wrestlers were doing with their falls, how they were falling on the mat. He was taking judo falls. And then he finishes the match and he does his finishing maneuver, which was called the Ghetto Blaster, and he jumps up from behind his opponent with a kick with his left leg, and as he's jumping he twists in the air and takes a judo roll and then covers his opponent for the 3 count. And I saw that, I said, he did a judo throw. This guy knows judo. This guy is a martial artist. And the other thing that impressed me is when he came to the ring, my sperm donor dad told me, he said, I know this guy. I know this guy from somewhere. And as the match progressed, he said, I know where I know this guy from. He said, this is the most dangerous bodyguard in New York. He is the bodyguard for either it was Aretha Franklin or Gladys Knight. One of the two, maybe both. And he said, this guy is the most dangerous bodyguard there is, and he doesn't carry a gun. And I became pretty interested in it. So sperm donor dad tells me one day, he goes, and he knew about subcultures and you know, stuff like that. New York was centered around gangs and the underworld and word of mouth, what have you. And you know, the Zulu Nation was coming up as like a, you know, a political gang. You had these things back then. and they had the African continent. They'd wear it as a chain around their necks, and they were the black gang. And then you had the Latin Kings and the Nietes and the lords, the young lords, and stuff like that. So sperm donor dad tells me eventually, because he knew about this stuff, he said, yeah, that's Alan, who comes from the dojo you practice in. He's a legitimate martial artist. And then him and my uncle were talking about him one day. He says, he's in the WWF. He's this wrestler now. Could you imagine that? And they said, yeah, didn't he win the Olympics? Oh, they didn't give it to him because he was a black guy. He was denied the gold medal. So Bad News Brown, Alan Koash, had a real reputation in the streets in New York. This was not a show. This was not part of his character for the wrestling. He was a legitimate badass and known for that all throughout Harlem and the Bronx and Manhattan and the nightclubs and everything, and with entertainers and the civil rights movement, which has always been really alive in New York. He was known as like the protector, like the real tough guy. So he had a reputation back when men were men and reputations meant something, right? So I'm getting ready in the locker room of the dojo to go practice one day, and one of the senseis walks in and says, Alan's here. And all the older guys, because the adolescents practice with the adults, were like, oh wow, Alan's here, oh that's awesome. So they started telling us younger guys, whatever you do, don't do anything stupid around Alan. He's no nonsense. He's a serious person. Don't say or do anything stupid around him. Now I'm getting excited. I'm going, Bad News Brown is coming in. I'm going to get to meet him. So he comes into the locker room, and he walks and he stands right next to me and changes his clothes into his gi like that. So quick, like Superman jumps in the phone booth, and here he comes. He has everything on, tightens his belt, and he's in the zone, but I don't know this yet. I'm just a young guy. And I stand up and I go, hey, Bad News Brown. I put my hand out. And this man looks at me. He didn't shake my hand. He looks at me and says, that's just that fake bullshit I do to make money. He goes, this is what's real. Don't talk to me about that bullshit and that nonsense here. And he walks out. And I'm standing there with my hand out. And everybody's looking at me, and people are shaking their heads like, you should not have done that. And there was one woman in the dojo. And I really have my opinions about women fighting men. I really don't think that they should be fighting men. I don't think they have the body strength to do it. But this was the toughest woman I had ever seen. I don't know what her name was. I don't know much about her, but she was rock solid, this old hippie that got into martial arts, and she was like always constantly there. When she would come to the dojo, they would tell us to get out of the locker room, let her in to change, and then she'd come out and we'd go back in and finish getting ready. So she was tough. Maybe she was a transsexual. I don't know. I mean, she was a big woman, but New York, hey, you never know. But she was tough. And as I'm walking down the hallway to go to practice, she stops me and says, "You should not have said that to Alan." And she's shaking her head, and I'm like, and she goes, "You should just change your clothes and go home." And I'm like, ooh. But, you know, I said, no, I have to go out there. So I get out there and I line up to start doing the rolls that I was mentioning earlier. That's how practice. Well, first we would do push-ups, and you know, we'd call them out, and you know, ich, ni, san, shi, go, roku, ichi, achi, kuju. We'd count off the, you know, how many push-ups we were doing, and sit-ups we were doing, and stuff like that. And then we'd line up. So we line up to do the rolls, and you'd come to the end, and then you'd start your 3 or 4 rolls down the length of the mat. And Bad News Brown is on the end with the master. He's on the end with the sensei, and he's staring at me. He's giving me this mean look, and I'm like, oh no, what is this about? So I get up to do my rolls, and I do one, and as I'm about to do the second one, he says, "No, come back here." Bad News says this, "Come back here. Do it again, throw yourself higher. Do it again, throw yourself higher." And he goes, "Okay, do them." And I'm doing them. And as I'm going down, he's going, "Higher, higher, get up there." He says, "Stop, come back." In front of the whole class, he goes, "Do it again." I do it. Come back. Now we're doing it on the other side. Now we're doing it on the, we started on the right, now we're doing it on the left. Higher, faster, do it, do it. And as we're doing the various rolls from various positions, he's on my ass. It's like, you know, but nobody else, just me. Okay. So then we start doing practice. You know, we're practicing with each other, and you know, we start out on our knees on the mat, and we, you know, lock up, and then, you know, start doing our, you know, our throws and our holds and all this stuff. And as I'm doing this, Bad News is right there. He's like, "You gotta put more into it, more into it. You gotta do, you know, that's not how you do it. Come on, do it, do it, do it." I'm like, well, you know, he's on my case. I mean, this guy just really doesn't like me. So it was the toughest class I had to that point. So I go home that night, and I'm saying to myself, yeah, Bad News Brown was, man, he really is a bad guy. And I go back like about 2 days later, and I go in the locker room, change up, come out to the mat, boom. There's Bad News again. At the end of the mats with the sensei, and I think I was late too. And he's giving me these stares again, and what have you. So I get in line, and it's the same thing again. He's getting on my case. So, and it seems like it's just me. If it was just me. So we're there doing our practice, and he switches me up. They had, you know, all of the adults. All the adults would be on their knees, and they'd take one student at a time, and they go down the line practicing with each other. And the idea was that you practice with all sorts of different people, and that's how you build your craft. Is you don't just practice with one person, you practice with a variety of people. And that's how you handle people in judo, how you handle your opponent. So the sensei comes to me, and I had bad news, told him to do it, and has me on the adult side, and wants me to practice with everybody else in the class coming down. And it wasn't too bad. I was able to make every person tap out that day, right? If I recall, they all tapped out. But I remember there was one kid, Dominican kid, in the class who was like, nobody beat him. Okay, he was very big, heavy, and what have you. So I kept holding him, like, by the neck and in between his legs, on his stomach, holding him down, using my feet and my knees to hold him down. So Bad News is there next to the sensei, and I could hear him say, let him keep going, let him keep going, let him keep going, right? I was with him for so long that everybody else had stopped practicing and was watching me hold this kid, just hold him down. And finally he's like, I quit, enough. And his feet were like off the mat and shaking. He's like, okay, I quit, let me go. And we were down there for a long time. So I'm like, wow, all right, Then I practice, and Bad News practices with me. And he, within a second, just takes me down, locks me up in a hold, and it's over. Done. And he was stiff. It hurt. And he dispensed of me and tied me in a pretzel. It was a couple seconds. It was just a couple seconds. And he said, you got a long way to go. And I was, okay, Bad News still doesn't like me. So I'm in the locker room and I'm changing up, and he comes in and he got some stuff, and on his way out, and he just turns around and he just looks, and he gives me another angry look. I'm like, oh gosh, this guy just doesn't like me. A day or two later, I'm going for another practice session, and I'm running because I'm late again. And I don't know why I was late. Maybe it's because I was really like, geez, I'm getting a little more than I bargained for with these guys. I'm getting a little more than I bargained for with Bad News Brown here. So I'm running down Riverside Drive, and as I run across the street, I'm not looking, and this car almost hits me. And I kind of like jump out of the way. And I look, and it's Bad News Brown in this big Cadillac or Lincoln, whatever. And he's looking at me like, you son of a bitch, I know you. And I go, oh no, he's driving this thing, and I ran out in front of him, he almost hit me. Oh, no. So I go to practice, I get on the mat, and there's Bad News again at the end. And, we start doing the rolls, and he starts doing the rolls with everybody. And he's rolling, and I'm behind him, and I'm rolling. And I mean, it's like, and I get in line, and I'm right next to Bad News. in line, and I'm going, I'm blown up, and it was more from fear, right, than anything else. But I'm like, because I know this guy is going to take it to me today on the mat. And I'm looking at him, and I look in his eyes, and he looks at me and he says, "Stop smoking cigarettes." And I said, "Huh?" He goes, "You need to stop smoking cigarettes." And I said, "I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm an asthmatic. I have asthma. I don't smoke cigarettes." And I'm sucking air. And it was quiet, and he looks at me. And he says, "You have asthma?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm very sorry." He goes, "I was told that you are smoking cigarettes. I would have never been so hard on you and rode you so hard," something like that, "had I known that you had asthma. You don't smoke cigarettes?" I said, "No, I don't smoke cigarettes." He said, I'm sorry, I apologize to you for treating you the way I treated you." And I just looked at him. I said, "No problem, Bad News. It's no problem." And yeah, and I didn't really see him too much after that day. I guess he went back on the road or whatever it was he was doing. But he was getting on my case and being so tough with me. I had found out that when he came to the dojo on the first night, that the sensei told him, said, "Look, this is what this student does, this is what this student does, this is what this student does, and, you know, show them what they need. Teach them how you have to teach them. Put something back in, you know, and everything." So and I thought that was really interesting. And he a very interesting figure, very interesting person, and super intelligent. He would bring a woman to the dojo with the Zulu Nation, the Black Power Africa continent chain, right? And I forget if it was his sister or his wife. I really, I don't remember, but she would sit there and watch as he practiced most times that he was there. And yeah, I remember that. And that night before he left, you know, he came over and he shook my hands. And I asked him too. I said, "This on the wall," it was really right over me. I said, they all said you won the gold medal, right?" And he told me, he said, "Yeah, they just didn't want to give it to a black man." And you know, he was a interesting person, and a New York legend. Make no doubt about it. He was the real deal, but a good person too. And that came off. He was a good person and an intelligent person. He defected to Canada, if I'm correct. I think he left the United States, and it may have had something to do with not getting the gold medal when he really truly did deserve it.